Right, so let's see if you can get some answers to some of the questions that Kenyans have been raising in the last couple of days. We are speaking to Michael Orua. He's joining us from our I&M studio. He's from the Society for International Development. Michael, thank you so much for speaking to KTN Prime tonight. Looking at everything that has been happening in the country for the last couple of days, do you get the feeling that this government is committed to the fight against corruption?
Thank you for the question. Feelings, they say, can be a little bit erratic, but I think the general consensus in the country today is that there's something wrong in the fight against corruption, if ever there was a fight against corruption, that there's no political commitment to fight corruption and root it out of our public institutions and private spaces. There's no result to show in the fight against corruption except statements of intentions. And I think given that, there's really nothing worth writing home about in the struggle against corruption.
Apart from the statements that we've had, of course, from different leaders, including the president himself, do you get the feeling that there's a full commitment, that this government is willing to go the full length to fight corruption?
Linda, I wish they were willing to go the full length to fight corruption, because today corruption is the biggest obstacle to the transformation of this country and its potential. Whether you look at the security sector, whether you look at the service delivery, devolution, there's nothing that stands taller than corruption in undermining the potential, the transformative potential of Jubilee government, its manifesto, and therefore the quality of life of every Kenyans. And you know, I think if Jubilee could gather enough courage, if the state could gather enough courage to fight corruption, the Kenyans would be fully behind the government. But I don't think there is a political commitment to fight corruption. We need that demonstrated. Like I've said, we need to move from statements of intentions to actual action and corruption. It's almost 5 months since President gave one of the most important, if you say, iconic addresses to the Republic on a state of the nation. And he called on us and to join him in the fight against corruption. He said we are drawing a line. 5 months after, we have not heard from the president or any of his capable officers or the institutions charged with the responsibility of fighting corruption a progress report on what has happened on the list of shame.
So this is, let's now focus on the issue that every single Kenyan is talking about out there, and that is the issue of the Ministry of Devolution, and whether or not the Cabinet Secretary Ann Waiguru needs to step aside, putting in mind every single thing that has been heard from her ministry, including the latest that we aired yesterday. In your view, do you think the Cabinet Secretary needs to step aside, and why?
It's an emphatic yes. Not just the Cabinet Secretary, but any government official, and let me say senior government official, because to demonstrate political will, you have to start from the top. Every senior government official who has been charged with the responsibility of taking care of our resources must respect the oath of office and step aside, not because they are guilty, not because people do not dislike them, but in respect of the position they hold in trust on behalf of Kenyans. And the law is very clear on the threshold of leadership and integrity that is required of our public officers. So stepping aside is not an admission of guilt, but it is an admission that there is something wrong, something has gone wrong under my charge. I want to step aside and give the investigative authorities the free hand to ensure that they get to the bottom of this. At that point, I wish, therefore, to even congratulate the Cabinet Secretary for Devolution, who has been touted as #1 whistleblower. I would challenge her to step aside, having demonstrated the willingness to blow the whistle on the NYS scandal, to take the cue and step aside, because really it's distracting on the struggle against corruption in this country. I think those adversely mentioned in corrupt incidents, those under whose watch the public have lost money and resources, have an obligation in respect of their constitution and the office they hold in public trust to step aside and allow objective investigations.
To be fair, the Cabinet Secretary is on record saying she is not aware of the allegations that are being leveled against her. As a matter of fact, he says she's not the accounting officer, so why should she step aside?
This government told us that the Cabinet Secretaries would have complete powers in the determination of how their ministries run. And it is touted as a positive thing when the president gives his officers, so appointed, significant autonomy to exercise powers in their offices. And I think if we celebrate that as a positive milestone, we must also be willing to match it when things have not gone right, that we take responsibility over the same.
Okay, finally, do you think it is time the president stepped in? A lot has been said about the Ministry of Devolution. As a matter of fact, as you rightly put it, when the president was giving the State of the Nation address, he gave that report that he released, he got from ESEC, and he asked the people implicated to sort of step aside. Do you think that now President Uhuru Kenyatta needs to step in with regard to the Ministry of Devolution?
I wouldn't allow me to avoid talking about the ministry specifically. I think no less than 6 cabinet secretaries have been mentioned in one way or another in corruption cases. If you look at 6 out of the entire cabinet, it's a serious indictment on the moral authority and the capability of the government to continue functioning in a way that is consistent with the constitutional promise of integrity. I think in that case, it is important that the president does not only step in, but also consider seriously whether there is a moment of judgment in the national interest that he needs to take in order to refocus the compass of in the fight against corruption. The Kenyans are looking up to the president. I think there is a corruption fatigue in the country, and I think there's an opportunity for the president to be great again in the eyes of many Kenyans. The question is, will he take it or will he let it pass again?
So you think,
it is raining.
So you think the president has a slight chance of salvaging this whole scenario?
He has a huge chance. Ultimately, he's the president of the Republic of Kenya. Kenyans will wait for the government to act and support the government in that clarion call to root out corruption. Kenyans, we always press on Kenyans to act. We need to have Kenyans be able to detect, disrupt, and desist from corruption. But they need to get the cue from the commander-in-chief, the chief executive of this republic, and senior officers, that when they act as whistleblowers, whether within government, as junior officers or not, they will be protected by the law. But even more importantly, the people whom they bring to light as corrupt will face the full force of the law and will not just go through the dance halls of the court system, but will be prosecuted, will be charged, will find their way to the places where we keep criminals, because ultimately we must look at corruption as a criminal act on the lives of Kenyans, compromising our right to service delivery and our nationhood.
Michael Orwa from Society for International Development. Mike, if you will, please stay with me, because you're supposed to be having this conversation alongside Beatrice Elachi, nominated senator. She's just walked into the studio. We'll have this conversation in a few minutes. So if you will, please stay with me. We'll have that interview in a bit now.